Welcome everyone to today's webinar, How to Rethink Your Cerner Point Solution Strategy to Stay Competitive in 2024. On behalf of Becker's Healthcare, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. Before we begin, I'll walk through just a few quick housekeeping instructions. If you have any questions throughout today's webinar, you can type those into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. If at any time you have trouble with the audio or video, please try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box. We are here to help. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce today's wonderful presenters. Dr. Aaron Neinstein is the Chief Medical Officer at Notable, and Ryan Pfeffer is the Head of Engineering at Notable. Dr. Neinstein and Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. I will now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you all. Excited for this discussion today. As you mentioned, my name is Aaron Neinstein. I'm Chief Medical Officer at Notable. Prior to my time at Notable, I spent more than a decade in digital health and informatics at UCSF. Most recently was Vice President of Digital Health at UCSF Health. I'm also a practicing endocrinologist.
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Pfeffer. I lead engineering here at Notable Health. Prior to Notable, I have spent over 15 years in the software industry, largely working for various startups and in tech verticals. Previously, before this, I was at Autodesk working in the construction vertical.
So our agenda for the webinar today, I'll be sharing how the field has gotten very crowded with digital vendors, why the adoption of so many vendors has come at a cost, and some of the benefits of choosing a single platform, including sharing some of my own prior experiences. I'll be joined by Ryan for a fireside chat, and we'll talk through how, from our two different perspectives, we think technology leaders and digital leaders should be thinking about innovation, integration, value as you all lead your organization's IT strategy and operations. But first, let's kind of go backwards to how our industry has gotten to a place where it seems like there's 100 different applications for every part of the digital front door. If you go back 20 or 30 years, across health IT, it was a best of breed world, right? So we had tons of different vendor systems running every part of a health system, lab information systems, PACS systems, order entry systems, note writing systems. EHRs came along and enabled single vendor platforms to operate health systems across the board in a very tightly integrated way. Well, along came the 2010s, and there was a rapid rise in consumerism and growth in patient expectations. Consumers began to expect digital first experiences. And so a large number of solutions were developed to come in and fill those gaps and to meet each area of need. We really saw this trend accelerate during COVID, with health systems really rapidly identifying areas of need and pain points during the pandemic and using applications to solve those digital immediate needs. And so while COVID really heightened the urgency of adoption for these digital solutions, again, we know consumers have really been having these expectations now for more than a decade, started way before the pandemic. And if you look across retail, media, financial services, travel, we all expect digital experiences that are convenient, that are easy, that are accessible, that are low friction. And so the same thing has happened in the healthcare domain as well. So patients really want these same experiences, but they want them with their health system. So many patients do utilize health system websites, portals, apps for scheduling and intake. You can see some of these great statistics here, and most prefer this to the traditional paper and clipboard. I hear this all the time from patients when we do focus groups or just talking to patients in my clinic. There is nothing more that people want to get rid of than the clipboard. So in response to all of these patient desires, again, health systems over time, and then accelerated during the pandemic, began to implement and deploy this wide variety of digital solutions for each of these individual areas. And so what has happened in a lot of places now is you've got a different vendor for scheduling, a different vendor for registration, a different vendor for payments, a different vendor for patient triage, a different vendor for patient messaging, and so on and so forth. Again, much like the pre-EHR pattern that we saw in the more core portions of health IT. I remember from my time at UCSF a few years ago, we actually did an assessment looking at the different applications that were sending messages to our patients. And we found at least a dozen different systems that were each messaging patients at different portions in their pre-appointment workflow. None of the systems had any idea that the other systems were sending messages. They weren't rationalized, and it could be that there were duplicate messages, that patients were getting different conflicting information from different systems about the same appointment or the same service that they were going to get. And of course, we spent a lot of energy rationalizing that. And so while health systems have been doing the right thing by trying to meet patient needs and patient expectations for faster, more convenient service, it's come at a cost because we have adopted so many different applications that may not be rationalized with each other. And so this can lead to a place that many are experiencing now where there's potentially disjointed patient experience. There might be more work for staff and providers. And of course, from my lens, managing digital and being part of the IT organization, it creates increasing expense and maintenance burden for IT organizations. Another story, that I remember from my time at UCSF is over the course of several years, I saw a pattern where every clinical department wanted to go buy their own application or their own vendor tool for collecting patient-reported outcomes data and bringing it into care. So breast oncology wanted a specific tool and vendor that was selling into the breast oncology space. Orthopedics wanted a tool that was selling into the orthopedic space. Cardiology wanted one that was selling into the cardiology space. Gastroenterology wanted one that was selling into the GI space, and so on and so forth down the line. And it got to a place where if we had gone down that route, we would have ended up with, frankly, a logistical nightmare with 20 different vendors, one for each clinical practice, one for each clinical department. And that would mean 20 different vendors were taking through the procurement process, 20 different vendors that need to do security reviews, 20 different vendors to do IT integrations, 20 different EHR integrated workflows to build, and you get the idea. And so the way I addressed it at UCSF and the way I advocate for others in a similar position is to, wherever possible, adopt a platform approach. And so what I did is spent time understanding the needs of the different clinical areas within our digital organization, understood the requirements and the needs of patient-reported outcomes collection tools from each of the clinical areas, and was able to go out and find one vendor that had a platform that would allow us to do everything centrally, but allow the clinics individualized care pathway build on top of the single platform. So to collect PROs for their individual clinical area. So that meant one procurement process, one security review, one set of EHR integrations. And really the core philosophy here was to centralize and standardize at the core and allow innovation on the edges. So my pitch to the clinical practices was, we are the digital and IT experts. Let us handle those needs centrally, and we want you to focus your energy not on the procurement process, on vendor management, on IT integrations, but on building the right clinical care pathways to serve your patients. So again, innovating on the edges rather than every clinic maintaining a full technology stack. The other amazing thing that happens is once you eliminate the difference in tooling, you kind of allow common processes to shine through. So you have a common set of analytics. And so it allowed us to be, frankly, more scientific about the patient funnel. We could build a templated dashboard along the patient journey that would allow us to view insights for a particular clinic, for the cardiology patient's journey or for the gastroenterology patient's journey, but you could also see common steps in the process or in the patient journey across different specialty areas because you were working with a common platform, a common vendor. So really allowed economies of scale from that perspective as well. So want to pivot the conversation to talk with Ryan, who I know has a wealth of experiences and background related to this topic from the engineering perspective. So Ryan, I'm going to pull you back in here and would love to kick off the conversation. You are our engineering leader here at Notable. How do you think about platforms as you're working with your team and you're procuring vendors for within our own software stack?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Let's see. There's so much to unpack there. I want to sort of talk through like each piece. How much time do we have? We have all day, right?
As long as you need.
Yeah, so I guess at the end of the day, I'm really looking as like somebody who's responsible for a lot of technology, but more importantly, the people who are working with that technology. I really sort of think about it from a few different perspectives. But one is like how much everything you do is a trade-off, right? So I'm getting something from this, but I also have to like manage the complexity that comes with this technology that I'm adopting, whatever it may be. And the best options are the ones that give you the most value with the least amount of complexity. So being able to choose a set of like a platform versus a point solution actually gives a quite a bit of leverage in that equation, right? Because I know, okay, if it's in line with this platform or if that platform provides it, I don't have to do all the things you mentioned earlier around, managing another vendor, figuring out the single sign-on and, SEIM provisioning and all those different pieces that come with onboarding a new SaaS provider as you often do. So that's sort of like, priority number one. The second thing I'm usually thinking about is like, what is the future of this thing, right? Is this technology that I'm adopting, is it sort of tried and true? Is it the future? And really going somewhere, or is it like bleeding edge and like really experimental, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what problem I'm addressing right now, I like may think about different parts of that maturity curve. And that's another big thing. So just like thinking about the maturity curve of this thing and in addition to how much leverage. I guess the last one for me that it comes down to is like every new person that joins my organization is going to have to work with this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every new person I'm bringing in, there's like a steep learning curve or like I have to go to great lengths in order to get them to adopt this thing. Like that becomes an important factor. And the best tools, like when you show them to somebody, it like all of a sudden they feel like they've gotten a superpower, right? All of a sudden they can go do something that they've never been able to do before. And it really unlocks them. And so I think those, if I were to like distill it down into three things, it would be like, how much leverage does it give me? Where do I want to play on the maturity curve? And, what is this going to give, the people that I work with?
Yeah, I mean the last point you made really resonates from my previous world. Thinking about IT staffing, right? If you there were definitely cases where there was a piece of legacy software where there was one person who'd been managing it for 25 years, and they were the only person in the organization who knew how to manage that piece of software. And as you're thinking about resourcing, that is a high risk situation where, if that person goes out on vacation, that software, no one knows how to use that system, versus economies of scale where you can staff and have backups for common tools.
Right. That's right.
Zooming out for one second, do you have a framework for how you think, like, do you ask yourself the question, is this a platform or a point solution? Like, what does a platform mean to you as you go about your daily work with your team? How do you think about even defining it?
Yeah. So in my career, like this question sort of comes up over and over again, because inevitably any software organization large enough ends up having a platform team. And then people
Yeah,
start to raise their hand. They ask themselves, well, what does that even mean anyway? Like,
right.
what am I doing here? What's my job? And so I always sort of fall back on sort of there's that classic Bill Gates quote of like, look, a true platform is something where like the value that's created on top of the thing is more than the value of the thing itself, right? Is ultimately a platform.
Hmm.
If you think of like the original sort of like classic example, like, building software on Windows back in the 90s, like that was one of the first, platforms, because like the ecosystem, right? If there's an ecosystem on top of it, then you got a
Yeah.
platform. It totally was.
So it's about leverage, really. Like, is there high leverage, or is it a linear
That's right.
relationship of value to inputs?
Yes. So basically, like, back in the day, Windows or Microsoft had incredible leverage back in the 90s because they had that ecosystem. So that's absolutely right. So the first one is definitely leverage. Let's see what else here. Um, there's a few things that I tend to think about, which is also just like sort of how comprehensive is it? That
Hmm.
is a really important factor, because like, yes, it's, something can be claimed to be a a point, you can call it a point solution, or you can call it a platform. But like, just calling it that doesn't make it that. It actually needs to do enough of the things.
Right.
And then even when it does enough of those things, like I'll put it this way. I've seen a lot of platforms that were like called themselves platforms, but really they were just like an amalgamation of point solutions,
Yeah,
right?
that was a little bit at the crux of my question too,
Right.
is I think there's risk of the terminology becoming meaningless when it kind of gets thrown around. So I was trying to think of, what's my mental model or mental framework for differentiating as you hear those terms out there.
Right. And so you highlighted it before, which is like, is there connectivity between the data, right? If I can do something over here and then go like use that in an entirely different place, but it's that same set of concepts that are sort of following me around, regardless of whether I'm doing task A or task B, then you're working with something that has really been truly thought of as like, okay, this is, a true platform that I'm working on top of here. Um,
Okay, so I'm going to pick on you then for your past experiences, because you have worked at companies over the years, uh, both that have built their code base from the ground up and others that have come to be through acquisitions. And then, you've got five different solutions and you're integrating to create a platform. I'd love to hear your reflections on the pros and cons of each approach. And, is it possible to merge together five different solutions to create a common platform? Do you have to build from the ground up? Like, what are your learnings and thoughts from your experiences?
Yeah. So like, people may be wondering like, why is this guy who is in the construction vertical like talking and why am I now in the healthcare? And like that question that you asked is like a very apt one, because my history was, look, I founded my own company. After that, like, went to join a software construction startup. And that software construction startup was called PlanGrid, and it was acquired by Autodesk. Now, this is a really fascinating story because it speaks to exactly what you're talking about, which is Autodesk seeing that it was facing competition in construction software. Now, it's always been great in design software. They've been sort of best of breed, but when it comes to actually building the building, they were seeing that they were losing market share to a competitor called Procore. Now, what they decided to do is say, like, you know what, we're Autodesk. We are, and they had a long, successful history of like acquiring companies and making them new flagship products at their company. And, of course, they're sitting on a massive bank account as well. And so they basically said, like, look, we're going to go spend, and they literally did this. They spent $1 billion acquiring
A billion.
a billion with a B. And they
Whew.
brought in all the employees. They like and like I remember coming in after, like, literally it was like the first week after the acquisition has closed, and now we're all Autodesk employees. We all got brought into a conference room when they said, all right, we've got 2 years to turn this like suite of software into a like a unified platform. And first off, we're all going, what? Like, we thought we were going to be like on our own for a while. And it was like, no, like, we're going to do this because if we don't, like, we're going to get eaten alive in the market. And it was probably one of the craziest time periods of my life. So this is like 2019 when this all kicks off. So we're doing this like through the pandemic with 5 different startups, basically trying to work together to build one common thing. But like the craziest thing about it is like we actually did it. Now, that doesn't mean, I want to caveat this. Like, I think there are very few companies out there who could actually go from like 5 startups to fully fledged platform in 2 years, right? And even then, in 2 years, it was probably like V0.1, right, of the platform, but we had something in market.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the whole point here is that, like, there are probably very few companies out there that can actually do this. Why did Autodesk succeed? First off, they had the authoritative like design software. Oh, there's my thumb. And then they had like an army of engineers who could actually go and work on this thing because they had
And
the
$1 billion to invest.
right, exactly, $1 billion, right? And so, like, you have to sort of think about, like, when I think about, like, am I adopting this platform? If it's really like an amalgamation of like different startups, I have to be thinking to myself, like, do they have the pocketbook to sustain and actually bring these things together over time? If they do, and they have some unique competitive edge in the market, then like it becomes a really, potential interesting thing to look at. But if they don't, then I'm starting to like question, like, the true strategy here, and like how, like, maybe they'll get there, but how long, right? And will there be other people who surpass them in the meantime? So that is like I think a really big thing. And again, like I feel really proud of the stuff that we did at Autodesk, but I like I said, I think there's very few instances where that would actually work out.
Yeah. And had you not undertaken that, I mean, I was giving sort of my non-engineer perspective on some of the risks and benefits of things being integrated, the integrated analytics, a single set of integrations with source data systems. Would that have been the case? So had you not integrated everything together into a common code base, are those the things you would have suffered from?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's one of those things where some of these early design decisions and early technical decisions, they sort of get rooted that way for a long time. And so even when you're sort of unified things, like, sometimes often those like inner core technical components remain really different at the end of the day, and that ends up percolating itself up in the software. And
Mm-hmm.
that's no different than even what we did at Autodesk, right? And so just timelines and constraints like really put that on you. And so at the end of the day, you end up having to create scenarios and reimagine things in a way that allows your customers to have that cohesive experience. And so, like, it really did force us to, think about it that way of like, okay, now everything is a platform component. Like, how do we go about building that?
Yeah. Yeah. And your comment related to Bill Gates earlier really resonated with me around a mental model for a platform being something where you have leverage and where value is not just a one-to-one relationship with the inputs. Because I think about our world now that we live in healthcare operations and patient experience. And if you think about some of the use cases we're talking about, right, like prior authorizations, text messages to patients, helping patients schedule appointments, checking them in or registering them for their appointment. If you build a single one of those, you can solve for one thing. But once you can start to actually mix and match capabilities that aren't hard coded into the software or were not the original intention, it gives you so much leverage around new use cases that the designers of the software could never have thought of. So that example or the framework you cited really resonates with me, and I'm curious to hear you also kind of riff on ability to, or how a platform gives you ability to innovate as an engineering team or an engineering organization.
So one of the key design principles that they teach every engineer, and it's funny how often this sort of like doesn't get used, but like the key thing that you really want to do is you really want to design for composition, like in your not only in your software that you're writing, like the code each and every day, but like the actual design of the software itself needs to be composable, right? So that like the capabilities that I build today can be reused in a maximal way. Like I don't know what my future inputs might be. I don't know what the future outputs might be. Like the data is going to flow where it's going to flow. But if I can create really useful individual units that are built to be composed together, like we've sort of, one of the things we've been saying over and over here is like our ability to like bring together new workflows is really only then limited by our imaginations, and like being able to like open that door to say like, look, like these Legos can come together in all sorts of different ways. Like let's think about those core fundamentals and then address each one of them individually there. And so that, yeah, just I can't stress enough how important, like when you look at a platform, it should sort of scream at you, hey, here's how I go about like composing these workflows together. If you don't really see that, like I start to scratch my head and wonder like, okay, like how does this work? How does this go beyond like what I see in the tin? Then I'll have, if I see that, then I know I have leverage. If I don't, it's sort of like, okay, I'm not really sure where to go with this.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I love the Lego blocks analogy, right? Because you could take multiple Lego kits, break them down, build totally new things. Sorry to go down the kids' toys rabbit hole, but you try to do that with like a Lego kit and a Magnetiles kit and a Lincoln Blocks kit. Like they're not going to fit together, and you're not going to be able to build something where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Right.
Where though is too far in this direction, right? So you could go all the way to the extreme. We're just gonna work with one vendor. Why create more complexity? Usually going too far to one extreme is the wrong answer. So I imagine in this case that is also the wrong answer. So how do you find the balance between hundreds of different point solutions versus one software vendor who does everything?
Right. So so there's a balance, right? On the pros of like having, like a platform or small number of platform providers that you work with, that they're going to be in it for the long haul, that they're, going to be invested in your success and are interested in, enabling that in a bunch of different ways. But you don't really want vendor lock-in either, which is I think what you're talking about. You go all the way down that side, all of a sudden you find yourself in this walled garden. Now, here's the thing. Usually, the most important problems that any organization needs to solve are usually within the seams of that organization. And usually if you've got teams in an organization, they're usually choosing different software to use, right? And if all of a sudden you find yourself in a walled garden and you really need to talk to you really need to integrate your workflows and the output value of your business unit with some other thing, and you can't do that, or it's really, really hard, then all of a sudden, like, okay, I question whether or not you're actually on a platform and more like boxed in, right? And
Yeah. I mean, what quickly comes to mind is 30% take rate on App Store, iOS App Store, right? Maybe that's an example of something going a little too far in one direction.
yeah, and like the iOS, the Apple ecosystem is very robust, and but that's certainly something that is very a polarizing portion of that. Um, I guess the other thing I wanted to highlight there is like we talked about composability, but there's also like extension points outside of the platform. So like if you can look at a platform and it's very easy to see like, hey, like I can bring in my data in this really, really easy way, or I can, send it out in just the right way. Then you like looking for signals of those like on ramps and off ramps, like becomes another really good signal to look for as you're looking for, that provider of like, it is like Slack is like my favorite example, right? It's like really easy to, create a little bot that like integrates with Slack and or pulls data out with Slack out from Slack, and it's sort of right there just when the user needs it. um Compare that with like iMessage, right? Like I know you can probably build something on iMessage, but that's a very nascent platform, so to speak. And I don't see a ton of people using that as a robust platform today, unlike Slack. And so it just definitely, to your example, it's sort of that iMessage experience still feels more like a locked in walled garden approach compared to what you get on Slack.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I know every time we talk about this, I learn new things. You've always got a heuristic or framework that are so useful for these conceptual discussions, and I think this one is so applicable just because we just see the sprawl that healthcare delivery organizations are managing in terms of IT relationships and different applications. And I know, especially over the past year, there's been so much margin pressure and cost pressure. And so there's a lot of pressure to consolidate. And so for me personally, as we work with different healthcare organizations, these frameworks and heuristics are really useful for me. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. I actually want to flip the script a little bit, and I want to ask you some questions, Aaron.
Uh-oh.
So
That
I'm
is
really
always a risky proposition.
so I guess my questions for you are like, look, you mentioned earlier you went through like the consumerization of healthcare, and specifically like COVID really put a little bit of pressure on this. So my question for you is like, I would love to hear about you, like your experience sort of buying and implementing the various solutions that people raise their hand and, in times of emergency and need said, I very much need this. So like, bring me back to like 2020, 2021. I know like not a lot of people like to go back to those time periods, but I think given what we're
Yeah.
talking, it makes a lot of sense. So like, I just want to know like, what exactly was your experience there, and why, like as a healthcare IT professional, what does that mean to you?
So for me, there's a couple of sort of guiding principles that really helped. One is being really problem focused rather than solution focused. So people will often come to you, line of business owners, right? So if that's a clinical department chair or a practicing physician or a practice manager, people will often come to you with a solution and say, I want you, IT team, to do this. I've chosen my app, I found a website, here's what I want. And being able to kind of help them step back for that and identify their core problem, what's the core outcome they want to achieve, what's their core pain point, allows you to sort of unpack the core job to be done, if you will, from what they originally come forward with. So that's step one, and I think that's really critical. If you do that with each of the different stakeholders around the organization, the second opportunity or guiding principle is to look for common patterns and themes. So I think this goes back to what we did in that patient-reported outcome scenario. If all of a sudden you're seeing 5 different clinical areas identifying a very similar pain point, a very similar need, it allows you to, untethered from the proposed solutions, look for a solution that might be able to apply broadly to multiple areas. And so for me, those are kind of the 2 main things: is step away from the solution to get to the core underlying problem, and then look for patterns that might have a common solution across a broader population.
Yeah, it sounds like we live the same lives. It's just, our end users are slightly different.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to be very careful. Everyone likes to be helpful. And so all of our first impulse is to rush in and help the person who's asking for something. And, one of my favorite phrases is sometimes being helpful is not helping. Sometimes you have to step back a little bit from that first instinct, and be helpful in a different way by really unpacking the problem and providing a different solution than the one that was initially proposed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that phrase we end up using. I know we've talked a lot about this internally, but that phrase of like alignment over autonomy, right? It's like you
Yeah.
want to have autonomy, but if like everybody's moving in a different direction, you just end up with like vectors sort of like canceling each other out, right? And man, how like it feels in the moment like you're doing something, but all of a sudden you like take a step back and you look and you're like, man, like that was just a lot of like I mistaked movement for progress in that moment. So I actually really love what you said just there. It's like sometimes helping is actually taking a step back and observing. Like, yeah, that's definitely true.
100%.
All right. I want to see if there's anything else that piqued my brain. Actually, there is one. This guy
Yeah.
get sort of like, okay, so you guys bought all these point solutions, and then you end up in this world where like, okay, people took that step back and they looked around and they say like, I don't know that we're using all these anymore, and maybe we need to sort of like try and consolidate a little bit. So like, how did you guys go about like sunsetting old solutions to help transition to like more of a platform at UCSF, right? Like, where have you seen that gone well, and like, what are the big mistakes that people make along the way?
I think to be honest, it comes back to very similar guiding principles, because if people are emotionally connected to a particular solution, what tends to happen is people get people feel a strong sense of ownership or emotional connection to their solution, and that can be very dangerous, because then they don't want to let go of that solution, as opposed to the problem statement, right? Like, I need something to help me outreach and schedule. I need something to collect patient reported outcomes. I need something to support seamless video visits with patients. And so I think the more you can unpack a conceptual understanding of, okay, what is this tool, application, solution? What is it doing? What job is it solving? What workflow is it solving? What outcome is it providing? The more you can start to unpack those and then look for commonalities, you can sometimes look for rationalization. We saw this in spades with telehealth platforms. Lots of health systems ended up with 3, 4, 5, 10 different platforms providing video visits for patients, and then they went through the process of rationalizing those. And if you look at it through the solution lens, it might look like, well, we really need these 10 different ones. But if you look at what are the core functionalities or the core jobs that they're solving for, and it's, well, the ability to connect a patient and a provider for a scheduled video visit, or the ability to connect a patient and a provider for an ad hoc on the fly video visit, the ability for a patient to do that on their mobile phone, those types of things. you can look and say, well, here's the standard way we're going to do that work going forward. It allows you to communicate to people that you are still solving their problem. I think what people are afraid of is that they're going to take a step backwards. And if you can untangle that from the emotional connection to the solution and instead connect them to the problem statement, it really helps with the change management perspective, because you can say, look, I understand your needs. I understand the outcomes you want to get to. I understand the experience you want to feel or provide to patients. And here's the way we can meet those needs in a way that reduces cost and complexity and all these other things for the organization. I think you can then bring people along on the journey. Where I've really seen things go wrong is when it gets into you know, I like vendor A and I like vendor B, and people lose sight of everything below the surface. Things can really go wrong.
Yeah, like, man, this resonates so much with me because like at that exact same time period, that like COVID time period, we were having discussions at Autodesk of look, do you want to win or do you want to be successful? Right. And if
Yeah.
it's like winning over success, like all of a sudden you stop, like, the individual may win, but like the team together will not. And so I remember Jim Lynch, our leader, often saying, like, look, fall in love with your problems, don't fall in love with your solutions. Right. Because if you fall in love with your solutions, like you may end up missing the bigger picture. And it was just
It does feel like so many things can be solved by the statement, fall in love with the problem.
exactly. So yeah, that's, man, this is some of these, like I said before, we I think we've lived the same life in many ways.
Yeah, totally. I have a feeling they're going to kick us off here, and I know there's probably a few questions from the audience that we should grab, and then let's see what we get.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Neinstein and Ryan, for that great conversation. We do have time for a few audience questions. So the first one here says, we've invested in a few solutions for our digital front door through and after COVID. It's difficult to justify ripping out these solutions and trusting a single platform for most, if not all, of our patient engagement experiences. How can we execute on a platform strategy while minimizing risk and disruption to patients?
It's a great question. I feel like it's very connected to what Ryan and I were just talking about, but I think so one is absolutely focus on the problem statement and not the name of the vendor, not the solution. I think the other piece is think about workflows, not interactions. And in healthcare, think patient journeys are so interconnected. And oftentimes we try to solve for one specific part of the interaction, just the prior authorization or just the referral. But if you think about patient access to care, um, it's not just about the prior auth. It's now that prior auth is done and I want to send a text message to the patient. And now that I've text messaged the patient, I want to give them a link to schedule their appointment. And now that they've scheduled their appointment, I want to give them a link to check in, register, and answer pre-appointment questions and pull in their insurance information to register for the appointment. And so each of these things are really integrated. And so I do think there's benefit to be had by looking at a patient journey orientation around the entire workflow and not just each individual interaction. Ryan, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think you hit him well. I just sort of reminded me, again, of like thinking about like how does your data like connect through the system, and is it easy to get it in, and is it easy to sort of like report on it and get it out later? So, that data connectivity is just so important.
It's such a good point, because if you imagine like the scenario I articulated, and if you are a executive at a healthcare system and you're trying to understand success rates for patients through the referral to scheduled appointment funnel, and you've got 6 different systems that are interacting, into like, I don't know how you could get analytics on that funnel. It would be really hard.
Well, I can tell you it's really good for the data lake industry because now everybody their data over to the data lake in order to get it working. So yeah, like that's what they're there for. But at the end of the day, like man, it's so much nicer where you could just go into the system of record and just sort of see it, right? Like, cloud providers today, they all sort of provide this sort of thing. So it's yeah, it's super, super important.
Yeah. Sarah, what else is on people's minds?
For sure. The next question is, our operations and IT teams have invested a lot of resources and time with our different vendors to customize the solutions for our unique needs. Sunsetting these solutions would feel like a lot of wasted work for our teams. How would you justify this loss with the benefits of a single platform?
Ooh, Ryan, you want to take this one first?
Sure. I mean, like, often like we just talked about reporting. So I think that's already one of them. It's like, that's a big thing of like, if you can't report on it and connect the full journey together, you can't really determine if you're getting better. I think a lot of people, you talked about this before too, but when you really move to a true platform that has the power built within, it has the data connectivity, it has like the on ramps and off ramps, and it's composable, right? Like as long as you're moving in that direction, you end up having like you go from having like it's almost like you go from having like sticks and glue, right? Of like, okay, I put it together in this way and like nobody touch it because like if somebody touches it, it may like not work the way it did before. Whereas like all of a sudden you're now moving to a world where you just have like a whole toolbox, right? It's not about like, does the model car fit together correctly or not? It's like, look, I can go and solve any problem. I'm really enabled to sort of like tackle whatever comes tomorrow, whether it be God forbid, another pandemic or something like that, or just hey, somebody's interested in experimenting on something new. Like it's so important to be able to have a platform where you can do some of that experimentation safely, right? And so like a true platform enables you to do that, and that's what I would say is like a lot of the like various point solutions out there, because they don't connect, there how could they possibly have thought about testing connecting service A with service B safely? Like it's sort of antithetical to what a really laser focused point solution product might be. And that's I think that's the trade-off, right?
Yeah, the analytics piece, Ryan, feels so important. I mean, like thinking about a totally different metaphor here, like if you think about financial reporting, right? So I'm an endocrinologist. Imagine I spent my last 5 years building the coolest custom analytics for reporting on the clinical finances for the endocrinology clinic. And then someone came along and said, okay, I want to see financial reporting across the entire organization. But I was, on an entirely different system with an entirely different data structure, and then I'm stuck, right? That's as far as I can go. Versus, again, having consistency at the core, common data model, common way of thinking about workflows, and then customizing on top of that. Yes, you might give away a little bit of personalization or customization, but you get so much more power to now say, oh, well, now I can compare endocrinology to cardiology to gastroenterology to orthopedic surgery, and I can build common reporting that compares one to the other. There's just so much more power and flexibility when you've got a larger chat fee like that. So yeah, that point really resonates with me.
Fantastic. I think we have time for one more question here. So,
Okay.
there most likely is not a single platform that can offer everything we would need. So, even with a single platform approach, some point solutions would be necessary. In terms of bringing on a new solution to an existing platform, what are some interoperability or technical traps that I would need to watch out for?
Ooh, Ryan, I'm definitely letting you take this one.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just repeating myself here, but it really comes down to is there a, robust set of on-ramps and off-ramps? And by that, I mean, you're looking for, do they have a webhooks API? Do they even have an API that you can hook into? Those are the sort of basic things you want to consider first. Inevitably, like as you start to looking at some of these point solutions, man, like it's really important, like, do they enable any sort of data sync capability, right? Those data sync capabilities end up becoming really important because inevitably you will hit a time where you need to do the reporting, and then getting that data into a data lake, or maybe shipping it back into your platform in a reliable way where you're not duplicating data, or you're not missing data. Those are all pieces. So really paying attention to the way that the data flows is absolutely critical. And again, assuming you've chosen the right platform, it should enable you to like pick and choose which of those point solutions you want, right? So, there's a lot of competing payment platforms out there, right? Like you should be able to, pick and choose between Stripe and Adyen, or, whatever it may be. Same thing with messaging platforms, right? So, like Twilio and, various other ones out there. So at the end of the day, I think that's probably what I would think about, is just thinking about like API access, data sync, and being able to sort of pick and choose various vendors. Because like if that point solution doesn't work out for you and you do want to switch, man, it's so nice if you can, right? And it's really nice to be able to sort of like have a transition, right? So maybe can you actually have both at once, right? And then like bring the new one on, move over the workflows to the new one, and then deprecate the old one. Anytime you're making a big hard change or a big hard switch cutover, those sorts of scenarios are always very high risk for the business, and you want to make sure that you're enabling yourself to again experiment, try safely, and like have an undo button if it doesn't work out.
I'll tack on one thing real quick to this, just from the user perspective. In enterprise software, what is so critical is understanding how different systems work together from a user experience perspective. And so a big red flag for me is any vendor who in their demo or what they show only shows you like what it looks like if the whole world was their system, because inevitably in enterprise systems people have to integrate different systems together, and you've got to create an integrated experience for the user. So I always look for companies that understand the other vendor systems that a user is already using and how their workflow will look as they integrate the different pieces together.
Wonderful. Well, that is all the time we have for today. I would love to thank Dr. Neinstein and Ryan for sharing their insights and time today, and Notable for sponsoring today's wonderful content. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us. Please take a moment to fill out the post-webinar survey on your console, and have a wonderful rest of your day.